A human Darkship followed an alien fleet for 30 days. Then its captain gave one order. The ship had no name painted on its hull, because paint reflects light, and light was the one thing the ship could never allow. Its crew called her Nightfall. On old Terran Deepwatch records, she was listed only as Hull Designation 7, an Umbra-class Darkship, built in secret, launched in silence, and meant to be forgotten the moment she left the shipyard. She was not large, she was not fast, in the way warships were fast. What she was invisible. Her hull bent light around itself like water flowing around a stone. Her engines burned cold, venting heat slowly through fins that faced away from any star. She made no radio noise, no radar echo, no gravity ripple that any normal sensor could catch. She was a ghost, and ghosts do not start wars, they watch them. Captain Ethan Voss stood on the narrow bridge of the Nightfall with his hands behind his back, looking at a black screen that showed nothing at all. That was normal. Most of the time, deep space showed nothing but nothing. He was a tall man, not broad, with the kind of face that people forgot easily, which was exactly the kind of face Deepwatch liked in its captains. He had commanded Nightfall for 6 years. In that time, he had never fired a weapon in anger. His job was not to fight. His job was to see, and to remember, and to come home and tell someone what he had seen. Humanity had joined the wider galaxy 15 years earlier, when a survey ship from the Galactic Concord had stumbled across a human research station near the edge of known space. The meeting had been polite, even friendly on the surface. Underneath, the older species of the galaxy had looked at humanity the way an old wolf looks at a new pup. Curious, a little amused, and not at all worried. Humans had chemical rockets 50 years before that. Now they had faster-than-light drives, true, but so did everyone else, and better ones. The Concord placed humanity near the bottom of its long list of member species, a young race with big ideas and small fleets, unlikely to matter for a century or two. What the Concord did not know was that humanity had learned to be quiet. Earth's governments, after the first contact, had done what frightened people usually do. They panicked in private and smiled in public. And in that panic, in dark rooms with no windows, a new branch of the military was born. One that answered to almost no one, and appeared on almost no budget. It was called Deepwatch. Its ships did not carry the flag. Its sailors did not wear medals. Its entire purpose was to go where humanity had not been invited, and look, and listen, and never, ever be seen. In 15 years, Deepwatch had learned 3 important things about the galaxy. First, it was far more dangerous than the friendly Concord diplomats let on. Second, there were empires out past the frontier who ate weaker neighbors the way sharks ate fish, and no one stopped them, because no one could. Third, and most important, humanity's survival depended on knowing things before its enemies knew that humanity knew them. Nightfall was on a routine listening patrol along the Kasari Drift, a wide, mostly empty region of space that separated Concord territory from the wilder frontier beyond. It was the kind of assignment that made young officers bored and old officers grateful. Nothing happened in the drift. That was the point of it. Lieutenant Commander Naomi Cole, the ship's executive officer, was the one who saw it first. She had been Voss's second for 3 years, a sharp-eyed woman who had grown up on a mining colony where a single mistake could kill an entire family, and it had made her careful in a way that could not be taught in any academy. She was hunched over the passive sensor display, her dark eyebrows drawn together, when she said the words that would end 30 ordinary days and begin 30 extraordinary ones. "Captain, I have something. It's big." Voss crossed the small bridge in 4 steps and looked over her shoulder. On the display was a smear of faint gravitational disturbance, dozens of small distortions moving together in a loose formation, still many hours away, but growing clearer as Nightfall's passive arrays refined the data. "Ships?" Voss asked. "Has to be. Look at the spacing. That's not debris. That's not a rogue asteroid field. That's formation flying. I count." Naomi tapped through several screens, her frown deepening. "I count 40 distinct signatures, maybe more, hidden in each other's shadow. 40 ships. In the Kasari Drift, where the largest Concord patrol group Voss had ever heard of, numbered 6. "Nationality?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer would be nothing good. "Petty Officer Raj Malhotra, the ship's sensor specialist, a soft-spoken man with a gift for reading noise that looked like nothing to anyone else, spoke up from his station. Drive signatures don't match anything in the Concord registry, sir. The harmonic pattern is close to what we cataloged from Kron scout ships 2 years back, over near the Verosi listening post. If that's right, this is a Kron fleet, and a big one. The name settled over the bridge like a drop in temperature. The Kron Dominion was not a member of the Galactic Concord. It sat beyond the frontier. In a cluster of systems the Concord had quietly agreed to leave alone, because the Kron had made it clear, several times and with great violence, that they did not welcome visitors. What little the Concord knew of them came from refugees, small, broken groups of aliens who had fled Kron expansion with nothing but their lives. The stories were always the same. The Kron came in numbers, they came without warning, and the worlds they left behind were empty. Ensign Pike, bring us to a full stop relative to their projected course, Voss said. Chief Kim, I want the drive signature masked as low as it will go, even if it costs us maneuvering speed. Malhotra, Cole, I want everything you can give me on where that fleet is going, and I want it fast. Ensign Dana Pike, the youngest officer on the bridge and the ship's helmswoman, had been with Nightfall for 8 months. She still sometimes looked like she could not believe her luck at being assigned to a ship this quiet, this important, this secret. She brought the ship to a slow, careful stop with the kind of gentle touch that would not create so much as a ripple for the Kron sensors to catch. If the Kron sensors were even good enough to catch anything from Nightfall at all. Deepwatch believed they were not. No one had ever tested that belief against 40 warships before. For the next 6 hours, Nightfall sat as still and silent as a held breath while the Kron fleet grew closer on the sensor display, resolving slowly from a smear of gravity into individual points of light, into ships. They were not beautiful ships. Kron design favored function over grace. Long, dark hulls covered in weapon blisters and armor plate, moving in a formation that spoke of long practice and real discipline. This was not a wandering group of raiders. This was a battle fleet, moving with purpose, on a heading that, when Naomi finished running the numbers, made her sit back from her console with her face gone pale. Captain, I have a course projection, she said. If they hold this heading, and this speed, in 32 days, they cross into Concord space through the Lorne Gap, and on the far side of the Lorne Gap is the Lorne Cluster. Voss finished quietly. He knew the region. Everyone in Deepwatch knew the region, because it was one of only 41 places in the galaxy where humans had actually planted a flag. A small colony, barely 6 years old, sat in the Lorne Cluster, on a rocky, half-terraformed world the settlers had named Meridian's Rest. 4,000 people. Farmers, mostly, and a handful of scientists studying the strange, gentle native species that shared the world with them. The Aeltiri, a peaceful people who had never built a warship in their recorded history, because until now, they had never needed one. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a long moment. The weight of what they were looking at settled into the room, the way cold settles into a house with no heat. They could be passing through, said Yuki Tanaka, the young signals officer, though even she did not sound like she believed it. They could be, Voss agreed. Fleets change course. Fleets have reasons we can't see from here. We are not going to guess. We are going to know. He turned to face his small crew, 6 people in a metal shell, smaller than a city bus, sitting between an Empire's war fleet and everything they had sworn to protect. Standard procedure says we turn around right now, run for the nearest relay, and send a priority contact report to Fleet Command. That report would take 11 days to reach anyone who could act on it. By the time a response fleet formed up and got to the Lorne Gap, this Kron force could already be sitting in orbit over Meridian's Rest, and we would have no idea what they did in the meantime, what they found, what they decided. We'd be flying blind into whatever they left behind. So what's the alternative, sir? Naomi asked, though her voice said she already suspected the answer. The alternative is, we don't leave, Voss said. We follow them, quietly. We learn their patrol patterns, their formation habits, their command structure, and most importantly, we learn their intentions before we ever have to guess at them. We send our report when we have something worth sending, not a course projection that might mean nothing, but proof. And if it turns out this fleet really is heading for Meridian's Rest, we will already be there when the shooting starts, instead of 11 days behind it. Chief Engineer Tobias Kim, A broad-shouldered man who had spent more of his career below decks than on the bridge cleared his throat. "Captain, with respect, 32 days of running silent, matching pace with 40 enemy hulls, means 32 days where one mistake, one stray heat bloom, one badly timed thruster burn, gets us found. And I don't think anybody on this boat wants to find out what 40 Kron warships do to one Darkship they've caught spying on them." "No," Voss agreed. "Nobody wants to find that out, which is why we won't make that mistake." He looked around the bridge, at Naomi's steady eyes, at Malhotra's quiet focus, at Pike's nervous determination, at Kim's honest worry, at Tanaka trying hard to look braver than she felt. 6 people. A ship the size of a large aircraft, alone against an armada, with nothing to protect them but silence and skill. "I'm not going to pretend this is safe. It isn't. But I've served with every one of you long enough to know you're the best crew Deepwatch has for exactly this kind of work. We are not going to fight that fleet. We are going to become part of its shadow, and we are going to stay there until we know exactly what it plans to do. Then, and only then, do we decide what comes next." There was a pause, the kind that happens right before people commit to something they cannot take back. Then Naomi nodded, and one by one, the others did too. "All right," Voss said. "Cole, plot us a shadow course, minimum thermal signature, matching their fleet speed with a 2-hour lag, so we're never inside their close-range scan radius." "Malhotra, I want a listening log running continuous. Every scrap of radio chatter, every drive flare, every course correction, logged and time-stamped. Kim, get below decks and make sure every system on this ship that doesn't need to be running right now gets shut down cold. We're going dark in every sense of the word. Pike, once we're locked onto their course, I want you at the helm in rotating 4-hour shifts with me. If they turn, we need to be ready to turn with them without a wasted second. Tanaka, you're on the comms board. If Fleet Command sends anything our way, or if we need to burst a message out, it goes through you, and it goes through you fast." The bridge crew scattered to their stations with the quiet efficiency of people who had drilled for moments like this 100 times, even if none of them had ever truly believed the moment would come. Within 20 minutes, Nightfall had gone from a mostly idle patrol ship to a fully silent shadow. Her already faint signature dropped to something close to the background noise of empty space itself. Her engines burned at the barest fraction of their capacity, just enough to hold pace with a fleet many times her mass and many times her speed, moving not through raw power, but through careful, patient distance. Voss took the center seat and watched the sensor display, where 40 points of Kron light moved steadily onward, unaware, unbothered, utterly certain of their own privacy. He thought of Meridian's Rest, of farmers he had never met, tending fields under a sky that might, in 32 days, fill with warships. He thought of the Aeltiri, gentle enough that Deepwatch reports described them as being incapable of organized violence, a people who had never needed walls because nothing on their world had ever threatened them until now. 32 days, Naomi said quietly, coming to stand beside his chair, her voice low enough that only he could hear it. "That's a long time to hold your breath, Captain." "It is," Voss agreed. He did not take his eyes off the display. "But we've done longer, on less important business than this." He allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Besides, I don't plan on holding my breath the whole way. I plan on learning everything there is to learn about that fleet, so that when the moment comes to breathe again, we know exactly what to say." Naomi studied him for a moment, then nodded and returned to her station. Behind them, the bridge lights dimmed further, part of the general power down that would let Nightfall vanish just a little more completely into the dark. Ahead of them, the Kron fleet moved on, 40 warships wrapped in their own confidence, never once looking behind them, never once imagining that somewhere in the empty black, 6 humans and 1 small silent ship had already decided to follow them, all the way to the edge of whatever they were planning, and, if it came to it, past it. The first day of the 30 had begun. In the hours that followed, while the ship settled into its new, careful rhythm, Voss allowed himself a few quiet minutes in his small cabin to think about how he had come to command a vessel like Nightfall in the first place. He had not started his career in Deepwatch. He had begun, like most officers of his generation, in the regular Terran fleet, flying patrol routes along the edges of human space, in ships that carried their names proudly on their hulls. Ships built to be seen, to remind neighboring powers that humanity intended to defend what little territory it held. It was during his 3rd year of service, after a routine patrol nearly stumbled into a heavily armed convoy belonging to a species the Concord politely called cautious, and everyone else called dangerous, that Voss had first understood something his instructors had never quite said out loud. In this galaxy, being seen too soon could be as deadly as being weak. 2 months later, a quiet man in a plain uniform, with no insignia, had approached him after a briefing and asked if he had ever considered a transfer to a program that did not officially exist. Voss had said yes before the man finished the sentence. Deepwatch had trained him hard, in skills no ordinary fleet officer ever learned: how to read a ship's power curve for the smallest hint of a hidden ambush, how to hold a crew's discipline together through weeks of total isolation, how to make the hardest kind of decision, the one where doing nothing and doing something both carried terrible risk, and only one of them could be chosen. He had commanded 3 different vessels in his career before nightfall, each one smaller and quieter than the last, each one teaching him a little more about the strange, patient courage that stealth work demanded. By the time he took command of Nightfall 6 years ago, he had come to believe, deeply and completely, that the bravest thing a ship could sometimes do was nothing at all. Simply hold still, and watch, and wait for the moment when watching finally became worth something. He thought, too, about his crew, each of whom had come to Deepwatch by a different road. Naomi Cole had grown up on Kepler's Hollow, a mining colony, perched on the edge of a gas giant, where a hull breach or a bad ore reading could kill an entire shift crew in seconds, and where the difference between careful and careless was measured in lives, not reprimands. She had joined the regular fleet at 18, transferred to Deepwatch at 26, and in the years since had become, in Voss's private opinion, one of the finest tactical minds the program had ever produced. Raj Malhotra had been a civilian signals engineer before the fleet ever found him, working for a small company that built listening equipment for deep space research stations, until a Deepwatch recruiter noticed the elegant, almost artistic way he could pull a clear signal out of what looked, to everyone else, like pure noise. Dana Pike was the newest addition to the crew, barely 2 years out of flight academy, chosen for Nightfall specifically because her instructors had noted, again and again, an almost uncanny gift for smooth, minimal, efficient piloting, the kind of flying that used the least possible thrust to achieve the most possible result, exactly the skill a Darkship needed most. Tobias Kim had spent a decade in fleet engineering divisions before Deepwatch found him, drawn in after he single-handedly kept a damaged patrol cruiser running silent for 4 days following an ambush, buying enough time for a rescue ship to arrive. And Yuki Tanaka, the youngest of them all at 23, had come to Deepwatch straight from a communications specialist program, still learning the deeper rhythms of the work, but already showing the kind of careful, patient attention to detail that the older hands recognized as the mark of someone who would, given time, become very good at this. 6 very different people, drawn together by very different roads, now bound by the same small hull and the same impossible task. Voss trusted every one of them completely, not because trust came easily to him, but because each of them had earned it, hour by hour, mission by mission, over years of quiet, unglamorous work that the rest of humanity would never know had happened at all. He returned to the bridge an hour later, to find the ship fully settled into its shadow posture, the lights dimmed, the air recyclers running their slow, quiet cycle, the crew moving through their new routine, with the careful economy of people who understood exactly how much depended on getting the small things right. Naomi looked up as he entered, and gave him a short nod, a silent report that all was, for the moment, as steady as it could be. "Anything change while I was below?" Voss asked, settling back into the command chair. "Nothing dramatic," Naomi said. "Fleet's holding formation, holding speed. Malhotra's still working through the early communications data, but he says it'll take time before any of it means much. Pike's got a good feel for the match speed drift already. Barely touched the thrusters in the last 20 minutes. "Good," Voss said. He looked at the sensor plot again, at the slow, steady points of light moving ahead of them, 40 ships wrapped in a confidence that Nightfall's presence, if all went well, would never once disturb. "Let's keep it that way. 1 quiet hour at a time, that's how we get through 30 days of this. Not by thinking about all 30 at once, but by getting each single hour right, and then getting the next one right after that." Naomi allowed herself a small, tired smile. You always did have a talent for making an impossible task sound like a checklist, Captain. That's the job, Voss said, and turned his attention back to the long dark ahead, where an alien fleet moved steadily onward, entirely unaware that its shadow had already begun. Over the following hours, the crew settled into the strange, careful rhythm that shadow duty demanded. Every action on the ship had to be weighed against a single question: could this be seen? A door closed too fast made a vibration. A meal heated in the galley made a heat signature, however faint. Kim rationed even the ship's cooling systems, running them in short cycles rather than a steady stream, because a steady stream, however faint, created a pattern, and patterns were the one thing that could be found, even through the deepest cover. Voss ordered the crew onto a strict schedule of silence during the hours when Kron scout ships were most likely to sweep their formation's rear flank, watching Malhotra's data logs for any sign that those sweeps had a rhythm they could work around. By the end of the first day, they had learned that the Kron fleet held a strict formation, 28 warships in a broad diamond with 12 smaller vessels, likely scouts or fast attack craft, running loose picket patterns at the edges. By the end of the second day, they had identified what looked like a command ship near the formation's heart, larger than the rest, bristling with what Malhotra guessed were long-range sensor arrays rather than weapons. By the end of the third day, Naomi had built a rough map of the fleet's patrol sweep pattern, and Voss had used it to slot nightfall into the one gap in their coverage that repeated, faithfully, every 6 hours. It was slow, careful, nerve-wracking work, made from thousands of tiny decisions, and every one of the 6 people aboard Nightfall understood, without needing to be told twice, that a single wrong decision could be the last one they ever made. But as the 4th day began, and the 5th, and the ship settled into the long, quiet chase that would stretch for nearly a month, something else began to grow in that small, dark hull, alongside the fear. It was patience. It was purpose. And underneath both of those things, quiet and steady as Nightfall's own hidden engines, it was resolve. Whatever the Kron fleet intended for Meridian's Rest and the Aeltiri, Captain Ethan Voss and his crew intended to know it first, and to make sure that when the moment for action finally came, humanity would not be caught blind. By the 7th day, the crew of the Nightfall had stopped counting hours and started counting habits. Life on a Darkship during a long shadow run was nothing like the stories young recruits heard in training. There were no dramatic firefights, no daring chases at full speed. There was only the slow, careful discipline of staying invisible, hour after hour, day after day, while an enemy fleet moved on ahead, never once looking back. Captain Ethan Voss had done shadow duty twice before in his career, but never against a fleet this large, and never for a mission that might end with a colony full of human children caught under enemy guns. The crew worked in short rotations, never more than 4 hours at a station before resting, because Voss had learned long ago that tired eyes missed things, and on a ship like Nightfall, missing things could kill everyone aboard. Lieutenant Commander Naomi Cole ran the day shift with quiet, steady authority, her eyes rarely leaving the sensor plots that tracked every twitch of the Kron formation ahead of them. Petty Officer Raj Malhotra spent almost every waking hour buried in Kron communications data, trying to pull meaning out of static and code. Ensign Dana Pike sat at the helm, with her hand always resting near the controls, ready to make the smallest of course corrections the instant the fleet ahead shifted its heading. Chief Tobias Kim lived below decks among the engines, nursing them along at their lowest safe output, coaxing extra quiet out of systems that had never been designed to run this soft for this long. And Yuki Tanaka, the youngest of them all, sat at the comms board with a patience that surprised even herself, listening for messages that might never come. It was Malhotra who made the first real breakthrough, on the 9th day. "Captain, I think I've got something," he said, his voice careful, the way it always was when he wasn't yet certain of his own results. "I've been recording every burst of short-range chatter between the Kron ships. Most of it is just formation coordination, the kind of thing any fleet sends between ships to keep station. But there's a pattern that repeats every 20 hours, always from the command ship, always answered by every other vessel in the fleet in the same order. I think it's a status report, a roll call." "Can you translate any of it?" Voss asked. "Not the words, not yet. Kron language is nothing like anything in the Concord linguistic database, and we don't have a native speaker to check my guesses against. but I can read structure even when I can't read meaning. And there's something odd about this roll call. Every response includes a short numeric sequence, always different, always specific to that ship. I think it's a supply count. Fuel, ammunition, maybe food stores. Fleets report on this stuff when they're getting ready for something, when they expect to need every resource they've got. Naomi looked up from her own console. Getting ready for a fight. That would be my guess, Malhotra said. I can't prove it, but guesses built from real patterns are worth more than guesses built from nothing. Voss absorbed this in silence for a moment, turning it over in his mind, the way he turned over every piece of information the ship gathered, testing it against everything else they knew. A fleet supplying itself carefully, conserving resources, moving in tight formation, with active scouting on its flanks. That was not the behavior of ships simply passing through on their way to somewhere else. That was the behavior of a fleet preparing for a fight it expected to have to win. Keep on it, he said. If you can find the pattern in their supply reports, maybe you can find the pattern in whatever comes after. Log everything. We'll build the picture one piece at a time. The days rolled on. On the 12th day, the Kron fleet passed close enough to a small, uninhabited moon that Voss allowed nightfall a brief, careful detour behind its bulk, using the rock's mass to hide the ship's own gravitational signature, while the fleet swept by less than 200,000 kilometers away, close enough that, for the first time, the crew could see individual Kron warships on visual sensors, instead of just gravity plots and drive flares. Naomi pulled up the imagery on the main screen, and for a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. The ships were larger than the sensor data had suggested, long and dark, their hulls scarred in places with the marks of old battles never repaired, only patched. Weapon blisters ran the length of each vessel like rows of teeth, and near the heart of the formation, the command ship hung massive and silent, its hull marked with patterns none of them recognized, patterns that Malhotra would later spend 2 full days trying to decode, without success. They've seen real combat, Naomi said quietly, studying the battle scars along the nearest cruiser's flank. Recently, too, by the look of some of that damage. Against who? Tanaka asked, from her station. Nobody had an answer. It was on the 15th day, almost exactly halfway through what would become a 30-day chase, that nightfall came closest to disaster. The Kron fleet had been holding a steady, predictable course for nearly a week, and the crew had, without quite meaning to, allowed themselves to relax into the rhythm of it. Voss would later blame himself for that, though every officer aboard agreed there had been nothing wrong with their procedures. The trouble came not from a mistake, but from something the fleet did that broke its own pattern for the first time since nightfall had begun tracking it. Without warning, 4 of the fleet's scout ships peeled away from their normal picket positions and began a wide, sweeping search pattern that cut directly across the gap in coverage Naomi had identified nearly 2 weeks earlier, the very gap Nightfall had been using to stay hidden. "Captain, movement!" Malhotra called out, his voice sharp with sudden alarm. 4 scouts breaking formation, vectoring toward our position. Voss was in the command chair in seconds, though he had never truly left it. Distance and closing speed. 900,000 kilometers in closing. At their current rate, they'll be inside our detection range in 40 minutes. I don't know if that means inside their detection range for us, sir. We've never tested that. For a long moment, the bridge held its breath. Nightfall's stealth systems had been designed, tested, and refined over years of careful engineering, built specifically to defeat sensor technology, far more advanced than most of the galaxy's ships carried. But no engineer, however skilled, could promise that a system was perfect. Every stealth hull had a limit. Nobody aboard Nightfall knew exactly where that limit was, or whether 4 alert Kron scout ships, actively searching rather than passively patrolling, might find it. "Options," Voss said, his voice level, though every person on the bridge could hear the weight behind the calm. "We could run," Pike offered from the helm, though her voice made clear she already suspected the answer. "Full burn, away from their search vector, but that means lighting up our engines at a level we haven't used in 2 weeks. If they've got any passive sensors worth anything, a full burn is the loudest thing we could possibly do. Or we hold still," Naomi said. "Cut everything non-essential, go full silent running, and trust the hull to do what it was built to do." Voss weighed the 2 choices in the space of 3 heartbeats. Running meant certain noise against a possible threat. Holding still meant certain stillness against an uncertain threat. In 30 years of service, in 6 years of commanding Nightfall specifically, he had learned that when in doubt, a dark ship's greatest weapon was always its patience, not its engines. "Kim, cut main power to anything that isn't keeping us alive," he ordered. "Environmental systems to minimum survivable levels. No cooling cycles, no non-essential systems, nothing. Pike, kill the engines entirely. We drift on our existing vector. Tanaka, Malhotra, I want absolute silence from every system on this ship that isn't strictly necessary to see what they're doing. We are about to become a rock in space, and rocks do not get noticed." The crew moved fast and quiet, the way they had drilled 100 times but never truly needed until now. Within 90 seconds, Nightfall had gone from a already quiet ship to something closer to true silence, her engines cold, her internal systems running on the barest trickle of power, her crew sitting in a hull that had begun, almost immediately, to grow uncomfortably warm as the cooling systems went dark along with everything else. They waited. The 4 Kron scouts swept closer, their search pattern wide and careful, clearly designed to cover as much space as possible in a short time. Malhotra tracked them in silence, not daring to run active analysis that might, even passively, create some detectable trace. He simply watched the numbers change, the distance closing, 700,000 kilometers, 600, 5. Sweat beaded on Chief Kim's forehead down in engineering, not from the rising heat alone, though that heat was real and growing, but from the simple, terrible math of the situation. If they were found now, drifting cold and dark with every weapon system powered down to nothing, Nightfall would have no way to run and no way to fight. She would simply be found and taken, or destroyed, and whatever she had learned about the Kron fleet's intentions would die with her, unheard by anyone who might act on it. At 400,000 kilometers, the nearest scout ship altered its heading slightly, angling away, sweeping back toward the main formation's flank. At 300,000, the second scout followed the same pattern, curving off on its own return path. By the time the closest Kron ship had come within 200,000 kilometers of Nightfall's drifting silent hull, close enough that, had that ship been running full active sensors instead of the passive sweep it appeared to favor, discovery would have been almost certain. Its own search pattern carried it past, and then away, back toward the safety of its formation, its search complete, its findings apparently nothing at all. Nobody on the bridge moved for nearly 10 minutes after the last scout ship's distance began, unmistakably, to grow again. "They're pulling back into formation," Malhotra finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, as though even now, speaking too loudly, might undo what had just happened. Voss let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Kim, bring environmental systems back up slowly. I don't want a sudden power spike undoing 30 minutes of very good luck. Pike, minimal thrust only, enough to keep us on a matching vector. No sudden moves." "Aye, Captain," came the reply, and slowly, carefully, Nightfall came back to a kind of half-life, her systems waking gently rather than surging, her crew breathing again, in air that had grown thick and stale in the long silence. Naomi sat back in her chair, running a hand through hair that had come loose from its usual tight knot. That was too close. It was, Voss agreed. He did not try to soften it, because there was no honest way to soften it, and his crew deserved honesty more than comfort. "We got lucky. Their search pattern was thorough, but it wasn't perfect, and our hull did exactly what it was built to do. Both of those things had to be true, for us to still be here. Next time, we may not get both." "Next time?" Tanaka asked quietly. "There's always a next time, on a mission like this," Voss said. "Which is why from this point forward, we treat every hour like it's the one where they find us. No more relaxing into the routine, no more trusting the pattern to hold just because it's held before." He looked around the bridge at his crew, at faces still pale from the last half hour, and allowed himself, just for a moment, a small, tired smile. "But we did it. We stayed hidden through the closest search they've run yet. That tells us something important, not just about our hull, but about them. They're being careful. Careful like people getting ready for something big, something they don't want interrupted." That evening, if evening meant anything aboard a ship with no true day or night, Malhotra brought new information to the small mess hall, where what remained of the off-duty crew had gathered for a quiet meal of reconstituted rations that tasted, as always, of very little. "I think I've cracked part of their supply reporting code," he said, sliding into a seat across from Voss, a datapad in his hand. "Not the language still, but the structure of the numbers. Every ship in that fleet has been reporting steadily decreasing fuel and increasing weapon charge readiness over the last week. That's consistent with a fleet slowing its overall pace to conserve fuel while keeping combat systems at high alert. It's exactly what you'd expect from a force that expects to fight soon and wants to make sure it has everything charged and ready when the moment comes." "How soon is soon?" Naomi asked, setting down her own ration pack. "If their fuel conservation curve holds steady, and if the distance to the Lorne Gap stays what we've calculated, I'd estimate they plan to arrive with close to full combat readiness in a little over 2 weeks, which would put them at the edge of the Lorne cluster, right around day 30 of our shadow run." Voss absorbed this quietly. 2 weeks. 2 more weeks of silent, careful shadowing. 2 more weeks of holding a hull together on hope and discipline. 2 more weeks standing between a fleet of 40 warships and a small human colony that had no idea, yet, that any of this was happening. "We need proof," he said finally. "Not guesses, however good. Not patterns, however convincing. Fleet Command isn't going to move a defense force based on supply report guesswork, and they shouldn't. If we're going to convince anyone back home that this fleet is truly headed for Meridian's Rest and truly intends to fight when it gets there, we need something undeniable. A destination lock, a direct communication, something no one can argue with." "That means getting closer," Naomi said, "or getting luckier with what we intercept." "It means both, probably," Voss said, "but we have 2 weeks left to find it, and after tonight, I think we've all learned exactly how careful we need to be while we look." Outside the hull, unseen and unheard, the Kron fleet continued on its steady, patient course toward the Lorne Gap, its ships gleaming faintly in starlight that reached them from suns long since left behind, its 40 crews going about their business, with no idea at all that a single small shadow, 6 humans strong, still followed less than a light minute behind, watching, waiting, and slowly, carefully, piecing together the shape of whatever storm was coming. Later that night, after the ship had settled back into its normal shadow routine, Voss made a point of visiting each duty station in turn, something he did rarely, but always found worth doing after a hard day. He found Pike still at the helm, well past the end of her shift, staring at the controls with the particular stillness of someone replaying a frightening moment over and over in their mind. "You did everything right today," Voss told her quietly, pulling up a spare seat beside the helm console. "I know," Pike said, not looking away from the controls. "That's what scares me, Captain. I did everything right, and it still almost wasn't enough. If that scout's search pattern had angled 10 degrees differently, none of it would have mattered how well I flew." "That's true," Voss admitted, because he had never believed in comforting his crew with anything less than honesty. "Some of what happened today came down to luck, and I won't pretend otherwise. But luck favors the prepared, Ensign. A less careful crew, a less disciplined ship, wouldn't have had luck to rely on at all, because they'd have already given themselves away through a dozen smaller mistakes long before that scout ever got close. You didn't just get lucky today, you gave luck something to work with." Pike considered that for a long moment, then finally looked over at him. "Does it get easier? The waiting for the next close call?" "No," Voss said honestly. "It doesn't get easier. It gets more familiar, which isn't quite the same thing, but it helps in its own way. You learn to carry the fear instead of being carried by it. That's really all any of us can do out here." She nodded slowly, something in her shoulders loosening just slightly. "Thank you, Captain." "Get some rest," Voss said, rising from the spare seat. "Tomorrow the fleet keeps moving, and so do we." The days that followed the near discovery brought a new, sharper discipline to the ship, one built not from fear alone, but from the hard lesson of exactly how close disaster could come, even when every procedure was followed correctly. Voss instituted a stricter rotation of silent running drills, requiring the crew to practice the full power-down sequence at random, unscheduled intervals, until Kim could bring the ship from normal running to complete silence in under 60 seconds, a full 30 seconds faster than the near miss on the 15th day had taken. Naomi expanded her tracking of the Kron Scout's search patterns, building an increasingly detailed model of when, and under what conditions, the fleet was most likely to break its normal patrol routine and sweep more actively, a model that would, in the days ahead, let nightfall choose its position within the fleet's blind spots, with far greater confidence than the rough guesswork of the first 2 weeks. Malhotra, meanwhile, continued his slow, painstaking work translating fragments of the Kron communication structure, and on the 17th day, he made a discovery that, while smaller than the destination coordinates still to come, gave the crew their first real glimpse into the character of the fleet they were following. Buried within one of the routine status exchanges, he found a repeating pattern that did not fit the usual supply report structure at all. Shorter, more varied, exchanged not just with the command ship, but between individual vessels directly. "I think this is personal chatter," he told Voss and Naomi, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. "Not official reports. Crew-to-crew conversation, the kind that happens on any ship during downtime. I can't read the words, but the pattern of exchange, short bursts, frequent pauses, occasional longer replies, it looks almost exactly like the shape of casual conversation in every human communication log I've ever studied." "Why does that matter?" Naomi asked. "Because it means they're not so different from us," Malhotra said. "Whatever discipline holds that formation together during duty hours, these are still people underneath the armor plate and the ship-to-ship etiquette, people who talk to each other when the officers aren't listening, the same as any human crew would. It doesn't change what they're doing, or what we suspect they intend to do at the end of this journey. But it's worth remembering, I think, that whatever happens when this chase ends, we're not dealing with some faceless machine. We're dealing with people who've been ordered into this, the same as we have." Voss turned that thought over for a long moment before answering. "You're right that it's worth remembering. It doesn't change our mission, but it's the kind of thing that keeps a person honest about what they're doing, and why. Keep listening, Malhotra. Every piece of this picture matters, even the pieces that don't point toward a weapon or a destination." By the 20th day, the crew had settled into a strange new normal, one built on equal parts caution and quiet confidence. They had survived their first true test, learned from it, and come out the other side sharper and more careful than before. The Kron fleet, for its part, continued its steady, patient advance, giving no sign that it suspected anything at all about the small, silent shadow that had followed it, unseen, for nearly 3 full weeks. But somewhere ahead, past the edge of Nightfall's sensor range, the Lorne Gap waited, and beyond it, a small blue-green world that had no idea a storm was gathering in its direction, one slow, careful day at a time. The 20th day drew to its close, and 10 more waited, patient and uncertain, ahead of the small ship still holding steady in the enemy fleet's silent wake. The days after the fleet's near discovery of Nightfall had passed without further incident, but every member of the crew carried the memory of that close call with them, a quiet reminder tucked behind every routine task, every silent hour on watch. By the 18th day, the strain of the mission had begun to show in small ways that had nothing to do with sensors or engines. Ensign Dana Pike had stopped sleeping well. She would not admit it out loud, but Naomi noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands sometimes trembled slightly before she caught herself and steadied them on the helm controls. Chief Kim had grown quieter than usual, spending long hours alone in the engine room, even during his rest periods, running diagnostics on systems that did not need diagnostics, because it gave his hands something to do besides sit still and think about how close they had come to discovery 3 days earlier. Even Malhotra, normally the calmest man aboard, had begun talking to himself under his breath while he worked, a habit none of the others remembered him having before this mission. Voss noticed all of it, because noticing his crew was as much a part of his job as tracking the Kron fleet. On the evening of the 18th day, he called a short meeting in the mess hall, not to give orders, but simply to talk. "I want to say something, and I want everyone to hear it plainly," he said, once the 6 of them had gathered around the small table. "What we're doing is hard. It's supposed to be hard. Nobody trains for 18 days of silence and comes out the other side unaffected, and if any of you tell me you feel fine, I won't believe you, because I don't feel fine either." A few tired smiles answered him, small but real. "But I need you all sharp, and sharp doesn't come from pretending everything is normal. So we're going to do something a little unusual. Starting tomorrow, everyone gets 1 full hour a day that belongs only to them. No duty, no watching a screen, nothing but rest, or a book, or whatever helps you clear your head. Kim, that includes you. No diagnostics during your hour, unless something is actually broken. Kim managed a small, guilty laugh. Yes, sir. We're not going to win this by working ourselves into the ground before we ever get the proof we need, Voss continued. We win by staying sharp long enough to see it through. 12 more days. We can do 12 more days if we take care of each other along the way. It was a small thing, an hour a day, but in the tight, silent world of a dark ship on a month-long shadow run, it mattered more than any of them expected. Pike spent her hour writing long letters to her family that she would never be able to send until the mission ended, letters that helped her sleep better than she had in a week. Kim spent his teaching Tanaka, who had never learned before, how to play a simple card game with a worn deck he kept in his locker, and the sound of their quiet laughter became, in its own strange way, one of the best sounds the ship had heard in weeks. The breakthrough, when it finally came, arrived on the 21st day, and it arrived because of patience rather than luck. Malhotra had spent nearly 2 weeks building what he called a partial dictionary, not a true translation of the Kron language, which remained mostly a mystery, but a growing list of numeric and structural patterns that let him guess, with increasing confidence, at the general shape of what the fleet's communications meant, even when he could not read the exact words. On the 21st day, the command ship sent a transmission unlike any of the routine status reports the fleet exchanged every 20 hours. It was longer, more complex, and sent not to the whole fleet at once, but to a small handful of specific vessels, the ones Naomi had already identified, through weeks of careful observation, as likely carrying the fleet's senior officers. Captain, I need you to see this, Malhotra said, his voice tight with the particular kind of excitement that came from finally, after weeks of frustration, finding a thread worth pulling. Voss came to his station, and Naomi joined them a moment later. This transmission includes a repeated data block, Malhotra explained, pulling up a series of graphs on his screen. I've seen fragments of this exact structure before. Twice, both times in the fleet's early status reports, back before we started tracking their supply numbers closely. I think this block is a star system designation, a set of coordinates, encoded in whatever system the Kron use for navigation. And this time, it's not buried in a supply report. It's the entire subject of the message. You think this is a destination order, Voss said. I think it's exactly that. And I think I can cross-reference the coordinate pattern against our own star charts, if I can nail down the encoding format. It'll take time, but it's the first real chance we've had to confirm a destination directly from their own communications, instead of guessing from course and speed. Do it, Voss said. Whatever you need, whatever time it takes, this might be the proof we've been looking for. For the next 30 hours, Malhotra barely left his station, running the coordinate block through every mathematical model he could construct, testing it against known Concord navigation formats, against older Deep Watch records of alien numbering systems recovered from previous encounters, against anything that might give him a foothold into converting an alien fleet's private navigation code into something a human star chart could recognize. Naomi brought him food he mostly ignored. Tanaka brought him coffee substitute that had gone cold twice before he finally drank it. Voss checked in every few hours, never pushing, simply present, a quiet reminder that the whole crew was waiting on this thread with him. It was deep into the 22nd day, in the ship's artificial night cycle, when Malhotra finally called the captain to the bridge, with a voice that shook, just slightly, with the weight of what he had found. Captain. I have it. Voss arrived within 2 minutes, still pulling on his uniform jacket, Naomi close behind him, both of them reading the exhaustion and something else, something heavier, on Malhotra's face. Show me, Voss said. Malhotra brought up the star chart on the main screen, a familiar section of space that every person on the bridge had studied 100 times over the last 3 weeks, the Lorne Gap and the small cluster of systems beyond it. A single point pulsed red, marked by Malhotra's translation of the coordinate block. It was Meridian's Rest, not the general region, not the Lorne cluster as a whole, where Malhotra might have allowed some room for doubt. The specific coordinates, translated as carefully and as thoroughly as 3 weeks of accumulated data and 30 straight hours of work could manage, pointed directly at the small, half-terraformed world, where 4,000 human colonists lived alongside the gentle, peaceful Aeltiri. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a long moment. Confidence level, Voss finally asked, his voice carefully level, though every person present could hear what it cost him to keep it that way. "Hi," Malhotra said. "Not certain. I want to be honest about that, Captain. I don't have a perfect translation. I have a very strong statistical match built from limited data. But it's the same coordinate block, repeated twice now in different transmissions, always sent specifically to what we believe are their command elements, and it matches Meridian's rest to within the resolution my calculations allow. I'd put my confidence at better than 90%. "That's enough," Voss said. "That's more than enough." He turned to Naomi. "Pull the full data package together, everything. The supply pattern analysis, the fleet composition, the formation behavior, and now this. We send it the moment we're confident in the whole picture, not just this one piece." "There's more, Captain," Malhotra said, and something in his tone made everyone go still again. "I kept digging after I confirmed the coordinates, because I wanted to understand the rest of the message, not just the destination block. I think, and again, I want to be careful about how confident I am here, but I think part of the transmission includes some kind of operational classification, a mission-type designator. I've cross-referenced it against the 2 other instances I've found of similar structures in the Kron communications we've intercepted from other listening posts over the years, the ones in the Deep Watch archive." "And?" Voss asked, though something in him had already begun to guess the answer, and did not want to hear it confirmed. "Both of those prior instances were associated, later, with worlds that stopped transmitting entirely," Malhotra said quietly. "Worlds the Concord later found abandoned, or worse. I can't prove this classification means what I think it means. But if the pattern holds, this isn't a scouting mission, or even a conquest mission in the way we'd usually think about it. I think this classification means clearance. I think it means the Kron Command has authorized total resource extraction, with no requirement to preserve the native population." The words hung in the recycled air of the bridge like something physical, something that pressed down on all of them at once. Naomi's hand had gone still over her console. Pike, at the helm, had turned in her seat, her face pale. Even Tanaka, young and normally quick to fill silence with nervous words, said nothing at all. Voss closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment, and thought of the last report he had read about Meridian's rest before this mission began, a routine colonial census update that had mentioned, almost in passing, that the settlement's small school now had over 300 children enrolled. He thought of the Aeltiri, a species so gentle that early Concord surveys had noted they possessed no word in their language for the concept of a weapon, because until humans arrived and taught them the concept by accident, they had never needed one. He opened his eyes. "We have our proof," he said, his voice steady now, steadier than he felt. "Cole, I want that full data package compiled and ready to transmit within 6 hours. Every scrap of it. The coordinates, the fleet composition, the supply patterns, Malhotra's classification analysis, all of it, with full documentation of our confidence levels on each piece, so Fleet Command knows exactly what's solid and what's still uncertain." "Understood, Captain," Naomi said, already moving. "Tanaka, I want the burst transmission ready to fire the instant Cole hands you the package. Highest priority coding, full encryption, routed through every relay station between here and Fleet Command that can carry it. So if one relay is down or compromised, the message still gets through another way." "Aye, Captain." "And once that message is away," Voss continued, turning to look at the star chart still glowing on the main screen, at the single red point marking a small, unsuspecting world, 8 days from a fleet of warships that meant to take everything from it, we are not turning around. We stay on this fleet, all the way to the Lorne Gap if that's what it takes. Fleet Command needs 11 days minimum to receive our message, organize a response, and get any real force out here. That leaves a gap where this fleet could arrive at Meridian's rest and begin whatever they're planning before any help can reach them. We are the only humans anywhere near that colony right now. Whatever happens in that gap, we're going to be there to see it, and if we possibly can, to do something about it." "Even against 40 warships?" Kim asked quietly, over the intercom from engineering, his voice carrying the same fear every person on the bridge shared, but had not yet said aloud. "I don't know yet what we'll be able to do," Voss admitted. "I won't pretend I have that answer right now. But I know this ship, and I know this crew, and I know that a single shadow, if it's patient enough and clever enough, can sometimes do things a whole fleet cannot. We have 9 more days before that fleet reaches the Lorne Gap. We're going to spend every one of them learning everything else we possibly can. Their weak points, their command structure, their patrol habits close to a target world, anything at all that might matter later. Because when the moment comes that we have to choose, I want us choosing from knowledge, not from fear. The data package went out 6 hours later, exactly as Voss had ordered. A tightly compressed burst of encrypted information fired toward the nearest relay station, and, from there, onward across the long chain of hidden Deep Watch outposts that eventually led back to Fleet Command on Earth. It would take 11 days to arrive. It would take longer still for anyone to act on it. Nightfall's crew had no way of knowing, in that moment, whether help would come in time, or whether it would come at all. What they knew was simpler, and in its own way, heavier. They knew where the Kron fleet was going. They knew, or believed with painful confidence, what it intended to do when it arrived, and they knew that for at least the next 9 days, and very likely much longer than that, they alone stood between that fleet and everything it meant to take. Naomi found Voss alone on the bridge late that night, the rest of the crew finally resting after the long, tense hours of compiling and sending the report. He was still watching the star chart, the red point that marked Meridian's rest, though there was nothing new to see on it. "You did the right thing, sending everything we had instead of waiting for more," she said quietly, taking the seat beside him. "I know," Voss said. "It doesn't make it feel any easier." He glanced at her. 9 days to the Lorne Gap. "Then whatever comes after. I keep running the numbers, Naomi, trying to find some version of this where a single Darkship makes a real difference against 40 warships, and I keep coming up short." "Maybe the numbers aren't the right thing to be running," Naomi said. "We didn't get this far by fighting fair, Captain. We got this far because for 22 days, an entire enemy fleet never once knew we were here. That's not nothing. That's not small. When the moment comes, I think you're going to find an answer that has nothing to do with how many guns we're carrying." Voss looked at her for a long moment, then back at the star chart, at the small red point that represented 4,000 human lives and an entire peaceful species that had never once needed a word for weapon, until now. "I hope you're right," he said quietly, "because in 9 days, we're going to need to be." Elsewhere on the ship, in the hours after the discovery, the rest of the crew dealt with the news in their own quiet ways. Tanaka sat alone at the comm station long after her shift ended, staring at the star chart, thinking about the letters home she had been writing during her rest hour, wondering if somewhere on Meridian's rest, a girl her own age was writing letters too, with no idea how much now depended on a ship she would never know existed. Kim buried himself in engineering work that, for once, genuinely needed doing, glad of the excuse to keep his hands busy while his mind turned over the weight of what Malhotra had found. Pike ran silent practice maneuvers at the helm long after they were required, as though sharpening her skills against controls that did not need sharpening might somehow prepare her for whatever came next. Malhotra himself, exhausted from 30 straight hours of work, slept for nearly 10 hours after delivering his findings, and woke to find that Voss had left a short note on his console, thanking him for work that, in the captain's words, may end up mattering more than anything else this ship has ever done. It was a small gesture, but Malhotra kept the note long after the mission ended, tucked among his personal effects, a reminder of the one time his quiet skill with patterns and numbers had stood, however briefly, between a peaceful world and disaster. Over the days that followed, as nightfall continued its careful shadow of the Kron fleet toward the Lorne Gap, the crew fell into a new kind of focus, sharper and more purposeful than the careful patience of the mission's earlier weeks. Knowing the fleet's destination changed everything about how they watched it. Naomi began cataloging not just the fleet's formation habits, but every detail that might matter if Nightfall ever needed to act, rather than simply observe. The response time between a scout ship spotting something unusual and the fleet's command structure issuing new orders. The rough firing arcs of the escort vessels closest to the command ship. The handful of moments during each day's routine when the fleet's collective attention seemed to relax, if only slightly, before tightening again. Voss watched this shift in his crew with quiet pride. They had spent 3 weeks as watchers, patient and careful, gathering information without any clear sense of how it might one day be used. Now, with a destination confirmed and a grim purpose suspected, that same careful attention had turned toward something sharper, more focused, though none of them yet knew exactly what shape their next actions would need to take. He did not push them toward any particular plan. He simply let them keep gathering, keep learning, trusting that when the moment came to decide, the ship would have everything it needed to decide well. On the 24th day, Fleet Command's first acknowledgement of their earlier contact report, sent weeks before the destination had been confirmed, finally reached them through the long relay chain. A short, coded message confirming receipt and promising further instructions once the full report on the Kron fleet's confirmed destination had been reviewed. It was not much, but it was something. A reminder that Nightfall was not entirely alone out here, that somewhere back on Earth, people were beginning to understand the shape of what this small crew had found. "They'll want everything we just sent," Naomi said, reading the message over Voss's shoulder. "The coordinates, the classification, all of it." "It's already packaged and ready," Tanaka said from her station. "I can send it the moment you give the order, Captain." "Send it," Voss said. "Full priority." "And Tanaka, flag it for the attention of anyone with authority to move ships faster than the standard response timeline. If there's any way to shave a single day off that 18-day estimate, I want Fleet Command to know exactly how much that day might matter." The message went out within the hour, carrying with it everything Nightfall had gathered, everything Malhotra had painstakingly translated, everything Naomi had catalogued about the fleet's habits and weaknesses. It would take another 11 days to reach Fleet Command, layered on top of the days already spent waiting for the first acknowledgement, a delay that no amount of urgency could shorten, built into the simple, unforgiving distances of space itself. The 22nd day ended, and with it, the third full week of the chase. 8 more days remained before the Lorne Gap, and after that, an unknown number more, before whatever was waiting on the other side of it. The last 8 days of the chase felt different from the first 22. Before, the crew of the Nightfall had been watchers, gathering pieces of a puzzle whose full shape they could only guess at. Now they knew the shape, and knowing it, changed the character of every hour that followed. There was less wondering and more waiting, less guessing and more grim, careful preparation for whatever would happen once the Kron fleet crossed the Lorne Gap and arrived at a world that had no idea it was about to be visited by an army. Captain Ethan Voss used those 8 days as well as he knew how. If Nightfall could not stop 40 warships through force, then it would arm itself with everything else it could gather. Every scrap of tactical knowledge that might matter later, whether or not anyone aboard yet knew exactly how that knowledge would be used. "I want a complete map of their formation habits," Voss told Naomi on the 23rd day, as the two of them stood over the plotting table reviewing 3 weeks of accumulated sensor data. Not just how they fly in open space, but how they've shifted formation every time they've passed near a stellar hazard, an asteroid field, anything that forced them to adjust. If they hold a different pattern when approaching a planet than they do in open transit, I want to know it before they ever reach Meridian's Rest. "Already building it," Naomi said, pulling up a series of overlapping formation diagrams she had been compiling since the very first week. "There's a pattern, actually. Whenever they've passed near a gravity well big enough to worry about, the fleet compresses. Tighter formation. Command ship moves toward the center. Scouts pull in closer instead of running wide sweeps. It's a defensive posture. Makes sense, if you're worried about debris or unexpected threats near a planet." "Good, that's useful. If they hold that pattern approaching Meridian's Rest, their scouts will actually be running a tighter sweep radius than they have out here in open space, which might work in our favor." Voss made a note, then looked up at her. "What about the command ship itself? Anything more on its systems?" Naomi shook her head slightly. "Malhotra's been trying, but the command ship runs a much tighter communications discipline than the rest of the fleet. Fewer transmissions, shorter ones, heavier encryption on what little does get sent. We know it's the brain of this fleet. Every major course correction, every formation shift, originates from it. But we don't have anywhere near the read on its internal systems that we'd need for anything more than that." Voss absorbed this, filing it away with the dozens of other fragments of knowledge the crew had gathered. He did not yet know exactly what any of it would be used for. He only knew, with the certainty of long experience, that in situations like this one, the side with more knowledge usually found options the side with less knowledge never even knew existed. On the 25th day, Nightfall's long-range relay finally caught a response from Fleet Command. Not the full mobilization order Voss had hoped for, but an acknowledgement, terse and coded, confirming receipt of their report. and informing them that a response force was being assembled, though its earliest possible arrival at the Lorne cluster remained estimated at no fewer than 18 additional days from the message's transmission date. 18 days. The Kron fleet would reach Meridian's Rest in 5. Tanaka read the numbers off her console with a flat, careful voice that did not fully hide how much the gap frightened her. That's a 13-day window, Captain. 13 days where that fleet could be doing anything it wants at Meridian's Rest, and the nearest help is still 2 weeks away. I know, Voss said quietly. He had known the math would come out something like this from the moment he ordered the report sent, but hearing it, confirmed, still landed like a physical weight. Fleet Command isn't being slow because they don't care, Tanaka. Forming a real response force, enough ships to actually stand a chance against a fleet this size, takes time no matter how urgent the need. They're moving as fast as anyone reasonably could. Then what happens in those 13 days? Kim asked, his voice carrying over the intercom from engineering, where he had been listening in. Voss did not answer right away. He looked instead at the small crew gathered on the bridge, at faces that had grown thinner and more tired over 3.5 weeks, but had never once wavered when it mattered. In those 13 days, he finally said, we do what we've always done. We watch, we learn. And if the moment comes where watching isn't enough anymore, we act on everything we've learned, in whatever way gives Meridian's Rest and the Aeltiri the best chance of surviving until real help arrives. Nobody asked him to be more specific, because nobody, including Voss himself, yet knew exactly what that action would look like. But something in his voice, steady and certain despite the weight of the numbers, settled the bridge in a way that pure reassurance never could have. The 27th day brought the Kron fleet to the edge of the Lorne Gap, and with it, exactly the kind of formation shift Naomi had predicted. As the great mass of warships approached the gravitational disturbance that marked the gap's boundary, their loose diamond formation drew inward, scouts pulling closer to the main body, the command ship sinking further toward the fleet's protected center. It was, in its own way, a small victory, proof that 3.5 weeks of careful observation had actually produced something useful, something predictable, in the behavior of an enemy that had, until now, felt almost impossibly unknowable. They're doing exactly what the pattern said they would, Naomi reported, watching the formation shift unfold on her display with something close to grim satisfaction. Tighter formation, reduced scout sweep radius. If this holds all the way through the gap and into the approach to Meridian's Rest, we'll have a much easier time staying hidden during the final approach than we did out here in open space. Small mercies, Voss said. Take them where we find them. Crossing the Lorne Gap itself took nearly 2 full days, the fleet moving with careful precision through the gravitational disturbance that had given the region its name, a wide band of space where the pull of several nearby stars created unpredictable currents that could, if navigated carelessly, tear a poorly built ship apart. The Kron fleet navigated it with obvious skill, adjusting course in small, practiced increments that spoke of long experience with exactly this kind of hazard. Nightfall followed at her usual careful distance, her own passage through the gap made trickier by the need to maintain both stealth and safety at the same time, a balance that kept Pike at the helm for stretches far longer than her usual 4-hour rotation, her hands steady on the controls even as exhaustion pulled at the edges of her focus. On the 29th day, the fleet emerged on the far side of the Lorne Gap, and Meridian's Rest appeared on Nightfall's long-range sensors for the first time, a small, blue-green world with thin ice caps and wide, half-terraformed continents, orbited by a single modest moon, utterly unaware of what approached it. The bridge fell quiet as the planet's image resolved on the main screen. It was not a grand world. It was not a wealthy one. It was simply home to 4,000 human colonists and to a species of gentle, curious aliens who had, by all accounts, welcomed those colonists with open arms 6 years earlier, sharing their world without hesitation, without fear, because fear of that kind had simply never been part of who they were. One more day, Naomi said quietly, reading the fleet's approach vector. At their current speed, they'll reach orbital range sometime late on day 30. Voss nodded slowly, his eyes still on the planet's image. Then we have one more day to finish preparing, for whatever comes after. That final day passed in a strange, taut quiet, the crew moving through their duties with the particular calm that comes not from an absence of fear, but from having simply run out of time to feel it fully. Malhotra spent the hours combing back through every piece of data the ship had gathered over the past month, searching for anything he might have missed, any detail about the fleet's weapons systems, its command structure, its habits, that could matter in the hours ahead. Naomi refined the tactical map she had been building since the 23rd day, now overlaid with the actual approach vectors the Kron fleet was using as it closed on Meridian's Rest, until it showed, in careful detail, exactly how the fleet's formation would likely arrange itself once it reached the planet. Kim spent much of the day below decks, running the deepest diagnostics he had performed on Nightfall's systems since the mission began, not because anything was wrong, but because he wanted, more than anything, to know with absolute certainty exactly what his ship could and could not do, in case the moment came when every last fraction of her capability mattered. Pike rested when she could, knowing better than anyone aboard how much the coming hours might demand of her hands at the helm. Tanaka kept a careful, constant watch on the comms board, in case Fleet Command sent any further update, though none came. That morning, before the long work of final preparation began in earnest, Voss called the crew together one more time, not to plan, but simply to make sure every person aboard understood the full weight of what the day ahead might ask of them. He did not sugarcoat the danger. He laid it out plainly, the way he always did, because he had long ago learned that a crew facing real danger deserved the truth more than they deserved comfort. I won't stand here and tell you this is going to be easy, or safe, or even certain to work, he said, looking around at the small group gathered in the mess hall. What I can tell you is that we have spent 29 days becoming the most well-informed observers of this fleet that exist anywhere in the galaxy. Nobody, not even the Kron themselves, understands their formation habits, their supply patterns, or their command structure better than the six of us do right now. Whatever we decide to do with that knowledge, we decided as the people best equipped in the entire Concord to make that call. Naomi nodded slowly beside him. We've earned the right to trust our own judgment here, Captain. I think everyone in this room feels that, even if it's hard to put into words. I keep thinking about the training simulations, Pike admitted quietly. None of them ever covered anything like this. 30 days of silence, then some kind of decision at the end that nobody back at the academy could have prepared us for. That's because nobody's ever had to make this decision before, Voss said. Not like this. Not with this much on the line. We're not going to find the answer in a training manual. We're going to find it in everything we've learned together this past month. He paused, letting his eyes move across each face in turn. I want every one of you thinking, over the next several hours, about what you know of this fleet, its weaknesses, its habits, anything at all that might matter. Bring it to me. Bring it to Cole, no matter how small it seems. The plan we build tonight is going to be built from everything this crew has gathered, not just from what I alone can see. The crew dispersed to their stations with that charge in mind, and over the following hours, small pieces of insight began filtering back to the command team, gathered from every corner of the ship. Kim pointed out, from his long hours studying the fleet's drive signatures, that the command ship's engines ran slightly hotter than the rest of the formation, a detail that might, he suggested, indicate older or less efficient equipment, despite the vessel's size and importance. Perhaps a flagship that had seen more years of service than its escorts, and carried systems correspondingly more vulnerable to a well-placed strike. Tanaka, reviewing her communication logs one final time, noted that the fleet's emergency broadcast protocols, on the rare occasions she had glimpsed anything resembling them in the data, seemed to route every alert through the command ship first, before redistributing instructions outward, a centralized structure that could be a strength in normal operations, but might become a serious weakness if that central point were ever disrupted at the wrong moment. Voss took every piece of insight seriously, weighing each one against Naomi's tactical map and Malhotra's linguistic analysis, slowly assembling a fuller picture of exactly what kind of fleet they were facing, and exactly what kind of pressure might do the most damage to its ability to respond quickly and decisively. By the time evening arrived and he retreated to his quarters to think through the shape of the plan with Naomi, he carried with him not just his own 30 days of command judgment, but the collected insight of an entire crew who had each, in their own way, spent a month learning to see this enemy clearly. Voss spent much of that final day alone in his small quarters, reviewing everything the ship had learned, turning it over again and again, searching for the plan that would let a single Darkship matter against 40 warships, without simply throwing away 6 lives and 1 irreplaceable ship for nothing. He thought about direct combat and dismissed it almost immediately. Nightfall carried weapons, but nothing close to what would be needed to meaningfully damage even 1 Kron warship, let alone slow an entire fleet. He thought about trying to warn the colony directly, but a warning without a real defense force behind it would only spread fear without offering any real protection, and worse, any transmission strong enough to reach the colony's surface risked revealing Nightfall's own position to the approaching fleet. He thought, too, about everything Malhotra had managed to translate from the Kron communications over the past month, not just the coordinates and the operational classification that had confirmed the fleet's grim intentions, but the smaller patterns underneath it, the rigid formation discipline, the careful, methodical roll calls, the tight, controlled communications from the command ship. Every piece of it painted a picture, not just of a fleet's capabilities, but of its character. Disciplined, careful, and, Voss began to suspect, deeply reliant on the certainty that nothing in this quiet corner of space could possibly be watching them, could possibly know more about their intentions than they themselves had chosen to reveal. An idea began to take shape in his mind that evening, still rough, still unfinished, but carrying within it the first real hint of a plan that did not depend on Nightfall's small handful of weapons at all. He called Naomi to his quarters an hour before the ship's designated rest period, and the two of them talked long into what passed for night aboard the Darkship, working through the shape of an idea that grew sharper and more certain the more they tested it against everything the crew had learned over the past 30 days. "It's not conventional," Naomi finally said, sitting back, studying the rough outline they had built together on Voss's datapad. "It's not anything Deepwatch trains for." "No," Voss agreed, "but nothing about this mission has been conventional, from the moment we decided to follow this fleet, instead of turning around. We've spent 30 days becoming something no Kron commander in that fleet has any reason to believe could possibly exist this close to them. An unseen, unknown presence that knows more about their fleet than they do themselves. I think it's time we made that presence felt, in the one way that might actually matter." Naomi studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll brief the crew in the morning. They deserve to understand exactly what we're about to ask of them, and why." "Agreed," Voss said. "No secrets between us, not for this. Whatever happens in the next day, every person on this ship earned the right to walk into it with clear eyes." Before that final night ended, Voss made one more stop, walking quietly through the ship to speak, in turn, with each member of his crew. He found Malhotra still at his station, reviewing translated fragments for what must have been the 100th time, searching for anything new in data he had already studied for a month. "You've done everything that could be done," Voss told him gently. "Whatever happens tomorrow, it won't be for lack of understanding what we're facing." Malhotra managed a tired smile. "I keep thinking there's one more piece I'm missing. One more pattern that might tell us something we don't already know." "Maybe there is," Voss said. "But you've earned some rest before we find out. Get some sleep, Malhotra. Tomorrow, I'll need your mind sharp, not your eyes tired." He found Kim below decks, running a final check on the weapon systems that had sat dormant for 30 days. Systems the ship had never once needed until now. "She'll fire true when we need her to," Kim said, without being asked, wiping grease from his hands with a worn cloth. "I've checked every junction twice. Whatever else happens tomorrow, it won't be because this ship failed us." "I never doubted it," Voss said, and meant it. He found Pike in the small crew quarters, not sleeping, but lying quietly with her eyes open, staring at the low metal ceiling above her bunk. "Ready?" he asked simply. "As ready as 30 days can make anyone," she said. "I keep thinking about the people down there, Captain. They're just living their lives, farming, going to school. They don't know how close this has come, and after tomorrow, they still might never know." "Maybe that's for the best," Voss said. "Not every act of protection needs to be seen to matter. Sometimes the best kind is the kind nobody down there ever has to know happened at all, because it worked well enough that their lives simply went on, undisturbed." Pike considered that, then nodded slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "I like that thought, Captain. I'll try to hold on to it tomorrow." Last, he found Tanaka at the comms board, running test transmissions on the wideband array they would need the following day, her young face set with a determination that had grown steadily over the past month, from something uncertain into something solid and real. "You've grown a great deal this past month," Voss told her. "I want you to know that's been noticed." "Thank you, Captain," Tanaka said, some color rising in her cheeks despite the exhaustion. "I was so nervous when we started this. I still am, honestly. But it's different now. I trust this crew. I trust this ship. I think, whatever happens tomorrow, we'll face it the right way." "That's all any of us can ask of ourselves," Voss said, and left her to her work, making his way back to his own quarters, for what little rest the final hours before the 30th day would allow. Outside the hull, unseen and unheard as it had been for 30 long days, the Kron fleet continued its steady approach toward Meridian's Rest, its formation tightening further as the planet grew larger on every sensor screen, aboard both the alien warships and the single small shadow that had followed them, patient and silent every step of the way. Somewhere below, on a world of thin ice caps and wide green fields, 4,000 human colonists went about their evening routines, with no idea at all of what hung in the darkness above them. Somewhere among them, the gentle Aeltiri watched the same quiet sky they had always watched, still innocent of the concept their visitors were about to teach them, the hard and terrible concept of a fleet that came not to meet, but to take. Aboard Nightfall, in the last quiet hours before the 30th day began, 6 humans prepared themselves for a decision none of them could yet fully imagine, built on 30 days of patience, 30 days of fear held carefully in check, and 30 days of gathering exactly the kind of knowledge that, in the right hands, at the right moment, might prove more powerful than any weapon a small ship could ever carry. The 30th day was coming, and with it, the order that would decide everything. The 30th day began the way all the others had, in silence, in darkness, with Nightfall drifting quiet and unseen behind an enemy fleet 40 ships strong. It would not end that way. Captain Ethan Voss gathered his crew in the small mess hall 2 hours before the Kron fleet was expected to reach orbital range of Meridian's Rest. It was not a large space, built for 6 people at most, and on this morning, all 6 of them filled it, standing rather than sitting, because none of them, not even Voss, felt much like sitting still. "I'm not going to waste time," Voss said, looking around at faces he had come to know better over the past month than he had known them in the 3 years before it. "You all know the numbers as well as I do. Fleet Command's response force is at least 12, maybe 13 days out. The Kron fleet reaches Meridian's Rest today. That gap is real, and it isn't closing. And somewhere down on that planet are 4,000 people, and an entire species who have no idea what's about to happen above their heads. We can't fight 40 warships, Captain," Kim said quietly, not as a challenge, but as a simple, painful fact that needed to be said plainly before anything else could be discussed. "No," Voss agreed. "We can't. Not with weapons. Not with numbers. If this were only about firepower, we lost this fight before we ever left our last patrol route." He paused, letting that settle, before continuing. "But firepower isn't the only thing that wins a fight. Sometimes fear does, sometimes doubt does. And for 30 days, this fleet has operated under one single, unquestioned belief: that nothing in this stretch of space could possibly be watching them without their knowledge. I think it's time we broke that belief, all at once, as loudly and as completely as we possibly can." Naomi stepped forward, and together, she and Voss laid out the plan they had spent the previous evening refining, the plan that had kept the two of them awake long past the ship's rest cycle. "Here's what we know," Naomi began. "We know their formation tightens near a planet, which means when they reach orbital range, their command ship will be at the center of the formation, more protected than ever, but also more exposed to anything already inside their perimeter. We know their communication discipline is strict, which means a fleet-wide alert, especially an unexpected one, is going to cause real confusion before it causes an organized response. Malhotra's data shows their command structure relies heavily on the flagship issuing clear instructions, and clear instructions take time to prepare, especially in a crisis nobody has trained for. And we know, better than anyone else in this galaxy currently knows, exactly what that fleet has been planning to do to Meridian's Rest, because we've spent 30 days recording every scrap of proof of it," Tanaka asked, though something in her voice suggested she had already begun to guess. Voss answered her directly. We break stealth. All at once. No warning. Right as their formation reaches its tightest point near orbital approach. And when we do, we don't fire a single shot at first. We open every channel this ship has, and we broadcast everything. Every piece of proof we've gathered over the last 30 days. Their own communications, their own coordinate orders, their own operational classification. All of it, in the clearest, widest signal Nightfall can produce. We send it to their entire fleet, ship by ship, so every crew member aboard every vessel hears their own command's private orders, played back to them in the open. And we send it, at the exact same moment, on every Concord-monitored frequency this region carries, so that whatever the Kron command intended to keep hidden becomes public across the entire border in the same instant. Silence held the mess hall for a long moment. They'll know exactly where the signal came from, Kim said slowly. The instant we break stealth to broadcast that close, every scanner in their fleet is going to have our position. Yes, Voss said. For a short time they will. Which is exactly why the second half of this plan matters as much as the first. He nodded to Naomi, who continued. During the broadcast, in the confusion that follows, we take one shot, not at a weapon system, not at their armor, because nothing we're carrying could get through either one cleanly enough to matter. We target their command ship's main sensor array, the one weak point in their design we've had 30 days to study up close. Disabling it doesn't destroy their flagship, it blinds it, for a critical stretch of time, right when their entire fleet is already scrambling to understand a broadcast that just revealed a hidden enemy ship. 30 days of stolen secrets, and proof of intentions they clearly did not want made public. A fleet that disciplined, that dependent on clear direction from its command ship, does not respond well to losing its eyes and its voice at the exact same moment its crews are already afraid of what else might be hiding in the dark around them. And then, Pike asked from her seat near the helm controls, her hands already resting lightly against them, as though her body had begun preparing for the maneuver, before her mind had fully caught up. And then we run, Voss said simply. Full stealth the instant the shot is fired, every system dark, straight back toward the relay chain, putting as much distance as possible between us and a fleet that will, for at least a short time, have no clear idea where we've gone, no working sensor array capable of finding out quickly, and 40 crews who now believe, with good reason, that a hidden human ship has been watching their every move for a month without their knowledge. Malhotra spoke up quietly. You're not trying to beat them in a fight, Captain. You're trying to make them afraid to have one. That's exactly it, Voss said. A fleet that size doesn't retreat because a single small ship damages one sensor array. It retreats because its crews suddenly have to ask themselves how many more ships like ours might be watching them right now, undetected, and what else those ships might know. Fear like that spreads fast in a disciplined force, especially one that's just been shown, in front of its own crews and in front of the entire Concord border, exactly what it was planning to do to a peaceful world. Even if they don't fully retreat, even if they only hesitate, reorganize, slow down to reassess, that buys time. Time is the one thing standing between Meridian's rest and whatever Fleet Command's response force is racing to prevent. Nobody in the small mess hall spoke for a long moment. It was Naomi who finally broke the silence. It's risky, she said. The instant we break stealth, we're a target. If their response is faster or better organized than we expect, we may not get the chance to run at all. It's risky, Voss agreed. I won't pretend otherwise, and I won't order any of you to do this without knowing exactly what we're choosing. But I've served with each of you long enough to trust your judgment as much as my own. So I'm asking, not ordering, not yet. Is this the plan we run? One by one, around the small table, the crew of the Nightfall nodded. Pike first, her hands steady now on the console in front of her. Then Kim, his jaw set with the particular determination of a man who had spent 30 days keeping a ship alive and did not intend to let that work go to waste now. Then Malhotra, quiet as always, but certain. Then Tanaka, younger than all of them, her voice small but her nod unmistakable. Naomi last, though everyone in the room understood that her agreement had already been given the night before, in the long hours she and Voss had spent building this plan together. Then let's get to our stations, Voss said. We have less than 2 hours before that fleet reaches orbital range. I want everything ready well before then. The next 2 hours passed in careful, focused preparation. Malhotra compiled the full broadcast package, every recording, every translated fragment, every piece of proof the ship had gathered, arranged into a single transmission, designed to be as clear and undeniable as 30 days of patient work could make it. Naomi finalized the targeting solution for the command ship's sensor array, running the numbers again and again against everything the ship had learned about the flagship's structure and position within the fleet's formation. Kim brought every weapon system Nightfall carried to full readiness for the first time in 30 days, his hands moving with the practiced calm of a man who trusted his ship completely. Pike plotted 3 separate escape vectors, each built around a different possible response from the Kron fleet, refusing to leave anything to chance that careful planning could account for. Tanaka prepared the wideband transmission array, testing and retesting the broadcast strength needed to guarantee the signal reached every ship in the formation and every Concorde relay station within range, all at once. Voss watched it all from the command chair and felt, for the first time in 30 days, something that was not quite fear and not quite confidence, but a strange, steady calm that came from finally, after a month of watching and waiting, having a clear course of action in front of him. The Kron fleet reached orbital range of Meridian's Rest exactly on schedule, its formation drawing into the tight, practiced pattern Naomi had predicted weeks earlier, the command ship settling at the very heart of the formation, surrounded on all sides by the protective bulk of its escort vessels, utterly confident, after 30 uneventful days, that nothing in this quiet corner of space posed any threat it could not see coming. "They're in position," Naomi said quietly, watching the formation settle on her display. "Command ship locked, sensor array target confirmed. This is it, Captain." Voss sat forward in his chair, his eyes on the main screen, where 40 Kron warships hung in a tight formation above a small, unsuspecting world, utterly unaware of the single Darkship sitting silent and unseen among them. "Bring us to firing position," he said. "Tanaka, load the broadcast, full power, ready on my mark. Kim, weapons hot. Pike, first evasion vector plotted and ready to execute the instant we fire." "Ready, Captain," came the replies, one after another, steady despite the tension that gripped every person on the bridge. Voss took one last look at the small crew who had followed him through 30 days of silence and fear to reach this single moment, and found in each of them the same quiet, unshaken resolve he felt in himself. "Nightfall," he said. "Drop the mask. Open every channel. Send it all." The order left his mouth simple and clear, and the crew moved on it without hesitation. Nightfall's stealth systems, active without pause for 30 straight days, disengaged in an instant, and for the first time since the mission began, the ship became visible, not to human eyes, for there were none nearby to see her, but to every sensor system aboard 40 startled Kron warships, all at once, a small, dark shape suddenly blooming into existence deep inside their protected formation, close enough to their flagship to have watched every private communication they believed no one else could hear. In the same instant, Tanaka's transmission fired outward in every direction the ship's systems could reach. A single overwhelming burst of information, flooding every channel the Kron fleet used, and every Concorde-monitored frequency within range of the Lorne cluster. 30 days of intercepted communications played back across the fleet's own systems, supply reports, formation orders, and at the center of it all, the coordinate transmission and operational classification that laid bare, in the fleet's own words, exactly what it had planned to do to Meridian's Rest and its people. Confusion erupted across the Kron formation almost immediately. Ships that had held perfect, disciplined position for 30 uninterrupted days broke formation in ragged, uncertain bursts, as crews who had never imagined being watched suddenly heard their own commander's private orders echoed back at them, broadcast for anyone in the region to hear. Weapon systems across the fleet began powering up in scattered, uncoordinated bursts, some ships clearly moving to engage the newly revealed intruder, others hesitating, waiting for direction from a command ship that, in this first chaotic instant, had not yet managed to issue any clear response at all. "Command ship sensor array. Firing now," Naomi called out, and Kim's hands moved across the weapons console with the precision of a man who had spent 30 days learning every detail of exactly this system. Nightfall's single, focused shot streaked across the short distance to the Kron flagship and struck true, exactly where 30 days of careful observation had promised it would, tearing through the delicate sensor array mounted along the vessel's forward hull. The command ship did not explode. It did not even lose its engines or its weapons, but in an instant, it lost its eyes. And in the tight, disciplined structure of the Kron fleet, a blind flagship was very nearly as dangerous to its own side as it was to anyone else. Evasion vector, now. Voss called, and Pike's hands moved across the helm controls with a speed and precision that came from 30 days of practiced discipline, banking Nightfall away from the chaotic formation and back into the stealth field that re-engaged the instant the ship's weapon had fired. Behind them, as Nightfall vanished once more into invisibility, the Kron fleet dissolved into confusion. Escort ships, unable to receive clear direction from their blinded flagship, broke into uncertain clusters, some moving to defend the command ship, others scanning wildly for a threat that had already disappeared, all of them now carrying, in the private thoughts of every crew member aboard, the terrifying knowledge that an enemy had walked among them, unseen, for 30 entire days, and might still be there, watching, waiting, capable of striking again at any moment they least expected it. Nightfall ran hard and fast for nearly 6 hours, her engines burning at levels the crew had not dared use since the mission began, putting real distance between themselves and the disordered Kron formation, before finally, carefully, easing back into the deep silence that had kept them alive for a month. Behind them, sensor readings relayed back from a hastily deployed Deep Watch listening drone, dropped during their retreat, showed the Kron fleet holding position near Meridian's Rest for nearly 2 full days, its formation ragged and cautious, clearly unwilling to commit to any action, while its command structure remained shaken, and its crews remained afraid of what else might be hidden nearby. On the 3rd day, with its sensor array only partially repaired and its confidence badly damaged, the fleet withdrew entirely, retreating back through the Lorne Gap the same way it had come, its ambitions toward Meridian's Rest abandoned, at least for now. 9 days later, a fleet command response force of 12 warships arrived at the Lorne cluster, expecting to fight a battle that had already, in its own strange and unconventional way, been won before they ever got there. They found a quiet, peaceful world, its human colonists and Altiri neighbors going about their lives with no idea at all how close they had come to catastrophe, and no idea at all of the small dark ship that had spent 30 silent days making sure that catastrophe never arrived. Captain Ethan Voss brought Nightfall home 3 weeks after that, quietly, the way every Deep Watch mission ended, with no parade, no medals, no public acknowledgement of what 6 people in one small ship had done. But within the narrow, secretive halls of Deep Watch Command, and eventually, carried in careful whispers through certain corners of the wider Concord itself, the story spread all the same. The story of a single human darkship that had followed an alien fleet for 30 days, unseen and unheard, and had ended a threatened invasion, not with an army, not with a battle, but with patience, with knowledge, and with one captain's single, simple order. The Kron Dominion, for its part, sent no further fleets toward the Lorne cluster in the years that followed. Word of what had happened above Meridian's Rest spread through their own ranks in ways no human ever fully witnessed, but Deep Watch listening posts along the frontier noted, in the months afterward, a marked change in Kron fleet behavior near any border they suspected humans might be watching. Wider patrol sweeps, more cautious formations, and a new, careful respect for a species they had, until that day, considered far too young and far too small to matter. The Galactic Concord never learned the full details of what happened in the Lorne cluster that year, but they noticed, all the same, a subtle shift in how humanity carried itself in the meetings and negotiations that followed. A new, quiet confidence that had not been there before. The confidence of a people who had learned, in the deepest silence imaginable, exactly what they were capable of when everything that mattered was on the line. Aboard Nightfall, life returned, slowly, to its usual quiet rhythms. New patrol routes were assigned. New stretches of empty space waited to be watched. But every so often, late in the ship's artificial night cycle, Captain Ethan Voss would find himself back on the bridge, looking at a black screen that showed nothing at all, remembering 30 days of silence, one single order, and the strange, quiet knowledge that sometimes, the smallest, quietest ship in the galaxy could matter more than the largest fleet ever built. The debrief at Deep Watch Command took 3 full days, officers from across the program sitting through every detail of the mission, every piece of data, every decision made in the long silence of the chase. Voss answered every question plainly, giving full credit to his crew at every turn, refusing again and again to let the discussion center only on his own final order, insisting instead that the true achievement belonged to 30 days of careful, patient work by 5 other people who had earned every bit as much recognition as he had, even if that recognition would never leave the quiet, guarded halls of a program most of humanity did not know existed. Admiral Chen, who had overseen Deep Watch operations for nearly a decade, listened to the full account with the careful, unreadable expression of someone who had heard a great many mission reports in her time, and found few of them as remarkable as this one. When Voss finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "You broke stealth on a mission built entirely around never being seen," she said. "You gambled 6 lives and one of only a handful of Darkships this program has ever built, on a plan that had never been tested, never been trained for, built almost entirely from 30 days of field judgment. I want you to understand, Captain, that under different circumstances, that kind of decision could very easily have gone the other way in this room." "I understand, Admiral," Voss said steadily. "I made the best decision I could with what my crew and I had learned. If it had gone differently, I would stand by that same reasoning, even in failure." Chen studied him for a moment longer, then allowed herself a small, rare smile. "Good, because that's exactly the kind of judgment this program needs more of, not less. Officers who follow procedure when procedure fits the moment, and who trust their training enough to depart from it when it doesn't. You and your crew did something today that no simulation ever prepared anyone for, and you did it well enough that 4,000 people down on that planet get to keep living their lives without ever knowing how close they came to losing everything." She paused. "That won't make the history books, Captain. It won't make any books at all, not ones anyone outside this program will ever read. But it happened, and it mattered, and I intend to make sure every person on your crew understands exactly how much." In the weeks that followed, each member of Nightfall's crew received the quiet, private commendations that were the only kind Deep Watch service ever offered. No medals worn on a uniform, no public ceremony, only a formal note in a permanently sealed record, and the private knowledge, shared among 6 people and a handful of senior officers, of exactly what they had accomplished together. Naomi Cole was recommended for her own command within the year, an honor she initially tried to turn down, insisting she still had more to learn under Voss, until he finally convinced her that the best thing she could do for the program now was pass on everything she had learned to a crew of her own. Malhotra's translation work on the Kron communication structure became the foundation for an entirely new intelligence unit within Deep Watch, one dedicated to slowly, patiently building out a real understanding of a language that had, until his month of painstaking work, been almost a complete mystery. Pike, Kim, and Tanaka all remained aboard Nightfall, their bond with the ship and with each other only strengthened by everything they had come through together. Voss himself returned to patrol duty within a month, back to the long, quiet stretches of empty space that made up most of a Darkship captain's life, back to the careful, patient watching that had defined his entire career. He did not think of himself as a hero, and would have been genuinely uncomfortable if anyone had ever called him one to his face. He thought of himself, simply, as a man who had done his job, on a ship built to be forgotten, with a crew who deserved far more recognition than they would ever quietly receive. But sometimes, late in the ship's artificial night cycle, when the bridge was quiet and the stars outside the viewport hung still and silent in the dark, he allowed himself to remember Meridian's rest, not the fleet, not the fear, not the long 30 days of silence, but the small, quiet image of a blue-green world with thin ice caps and wide green fields, still turning peacefully beneath its single moon, its 4,000 human colonists, and its gentle, curious Aeltiri neighbors, going about their lives, undisturbed, unafraid, and entirely unaware of how close they had once come to losing it all. That, in the end, was enough. It had always been enough. From the very first moment Naomi Cole had looked up from her sensor display and said the words that started it all. "Captain, I have something. It's big." Voss hoped, for everyone's sake, that Nightfall would never need to prove herself again in quite that way. But he knew, deep down, that if the day ever came, his crew would be ready, and the Darkship would once again vanish into the silent black, patient and unseen, exactly as she had been built to do.